Welcome to the Chicago Open Archives podcast, a production of Chicago Area Archivists. This is one of a series of interviews that we're calling Archival Origin Stories, in which we talk to Chicago Area Archivist members about what they do, how they found themselves doing what it is that they do, and why archival work matters. I'm Andy Steadham, past chair of the Chicago Area Archivists Steering Committee and senior archives specialist in heritage communications at Rotary International. I'm here with Tom Colley, archive and collection manager for Video Data Bank at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Tom, thank you.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome to Chicago Open Archives podcast.
Thank you very much.
When you meet somebody from outside of the profession for the first time, how is it that you describe what it is that you do?
It first starts with me trying to judge how much they actually want to know. And if I don't think they're going to do any follow-up questions, I just tell them I'm a librarian.
Really? Just the shorthand, just go straight to the you know what that is. So.
Right. So I don't have to explain much more. If it's somebody who I think will actually care a little bit or want to know more, I will say that I'm a moving image archivist and then explain that a little bit, saying that I preserve old videotapes and digitize them, which is something that most people sort of understand.
Yeah. I have some old VHS tapes in my closet.
Right. And then we can go into that conversation and I can give them some basic advice of how to get their old family video. And that's sort of like the easy answer. If somebody really wants to know more, there's the whole question of, because I work at the Video Data Bank, we're an archive and distributor of video art. And so trying to explain what video art becomes the real problem that's the real stumbling block, because most people, unless they're experienced in the art world, may or may not have encountered experimental video art. And so that can be a more complicated discussion. So I usually just sort of keep it to, there's a collection of videotapes at the School of the Art Institute that I take care of. But that's the various levels of explaining what I do.
Right. Do you ever get questions for those, minority of folks who are really interested in learning more about it, who then want your advice about archiving their own videos or their own things?
Yeah, definitely. And that's fun because it's fun to talk to people about what I do and try to relate maybe what I do professionally to a scale that makes sense for their personal collections. Or I will encounter people, particularly if I'm at some sort of conference or that would make sense that I would encounter people, but maybe not just a moving image conference, but some sort of other archival conference where people we have this collection of videotapes. We have 40, 50 tapes in the closet that we don't really deal with. So that's exciting to be able to, because there are a number of resources out there that can be really useful and helpful to people but may not know exactly where to start. And it's videotapes and film and audio materials are often, in certain sorts of archival settings, they're the stepchildren or the forgot about.
It's interesting. I think they are kind of the stepchildren, but the flip side is there really are a lot of resources. In fact, there are so many resources that it can be pretty daunting. So I would imagine that you would be a pretty great resource in yourself just to say, read this.
Right. There's every bit of information out there on the internet that you could want, but trying to find a good place to start is, it's good to have a personal human tell you something.
Exactly. All right. Well, so this series is called Archival Origin Stories. Let's hear you talk a little bit about how it is that you found yourself in this role.
It's sort of a circuitous path. Let's start back in the beginning. I was always a collector as a kid and stuff. I collected comic books and records and things like that. And so I've always been sort of interested in cataloging to a degree of my various collections of things. And so had an interest in, vague terms, sort of like what we do as archivists. But then in college, I did art and video production and made my own films and videos and stuff. And so like I did production, and then getting out of school, I ended up working at, anybody who's listening to this from Chicago, Earwax Video, and also a cafe. I started, looking for a job out of college. I ended up like washing dishes and cooking at this cafe, and then I got to move upstairs to the video store. So I was, I was like the video store guy, like in the movie Clerks or whatever. If anybody who's listening to this is old enough to remember video stores, that was me for a while. And so
everyone in this recording studio knows what you're talking about.
So yeah, I did that for a little while. And then a friend of mine had gotten a job at the Video Data Bank, and they needed a part-time person to come in and just do shipping and receiving and make VHS dubs to send out to people who are renting copies of the work. And it paid a little bit more than the minimum wage I was making at the video store. And so, yeah, I was like, yeah, sounds great. And I already had like a familiarity with video art and stuff from my studies in school. So, I got into the Video Data Bank sort of before I got into the idea of being an archivist, and then I guess about 3 years into me working there part-time, they decided they needed to really sort of up their game with dealing with the collection in a more professional archival sort of way, and were changing my position to a full-time position, and they asked me if I wanted to roll into that. And so I said yes, and I went back to school part-time and got a library degree from Champaign-Urbana doing the LEAP program that they have, the long-distance program. And so then I started like going to conferences and really throwing myself into becoming a moving image archivist in a way. And I tell people I feel like I'm sort of like the last generation of people who kind of fell into moving image archiving before places like NYU and then UCLA and some other places started these master's programs. Yeah. And so I'm sort of kind of fell into it right before those programs started. But yeah, it was through the interest in the medium that got me into the organization that then had the need for me to train myself. Being from having a production background was really useful because a lot of video preservation work is, using the tools of production to copy, migrate, digitize the work. So, yeah.
And have a fundamental understanding of how it was made in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. It's very useful. When I was still in college making videos, the early 90s, it was still analog videotape to videotape.
Sure.
It was the very beginning of a little bit of digital stuff, but it wasn't, the tools were expensive, and, the computer in the library had 1 gig, huge hard drive, which we could use to like create title screens. And it was like, would use the entire memory to create like one little title sequence for something. So I was like right on the cusp. So I had like some basic training in the old stuff. So like now when I deal with older video, I understand, like you said, the methods of how it's made and the materiality of it. And so it's been interesting to sort of span that era and now the digital era.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to evangelize that preservation is important, particularly with video, and we need to work on that and think about it. And
the clock is ticking.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and moving image material is a huge part of the last 30, 40 years, 50 years now of our histories. And I think, like we were talking earlier about people's personal collections, like, I think home video is like a huge record of culture and different cultures in America, and like just like the things that people don't necessarily write about. And so I think that kind of material is important for people to really think about, like not just archivists, but also like general public thinking about their own histories, and that it's, something that needs to be addressed to keep around.
So now that you're in this role, you've arrived. What is your typical day at Video Data Bank like?
Oh, it's changed. I mean, I've been at the Video Data Bank since 1999, so 20 years now. And my time has changed dramatically of what, like, my day-to-day work is completely different than what it was when I started.
Describe, if you can,
a
little, like,
okay.
briefly maybe,
so,
the evolution that you're talking about.
Okay, so the evolution of it is that, I mean, much of it's the same, but when I first started, everything was all videotape.
Yeah.
When a lot of what we do isn't just archival work, it's distribution work. So a part of my job is to create the access copies that go out into the world to be screened at a festival or shown in a classroom or exhibited in a museum. And so back in the day, it was go get the submaster and put it in a Betacam SP deck and take wires and hook it up through patch bays and record it to a VHS or whatever format that was going out, and making copies to send out that way. Now everything is all digital files.
Yeah.
And so and in the process from making tapes that way, we had to digitize everything. And I started working on that in 2009, and that was a lot of my day-to-day for a while, was just digitizing the collection. And then a few years later, about 5 years later, we were able to hire Kristen McDonough, who was with us for 3 years and really sped up our digitization process. So now everything's pretty much digitized. So a lot of my day-to-day, for fulfilling orders at least, is now processing digital files. Because once it's digitized, it's not necessarily a file that you can send out. You can't send out the master copy. You have to then transcode it to a compressed file or some other format to send out.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure listening to you talk about your work.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please check out other interviews in this series. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Chicago Area Archivists COA podcast. We would like to thank our gracious interviewees, the Chicago Area Archivists Steering Committee, engineer Allison Shine-Holmes, WFMT, and the project chair Danielle Nowak for their time and efforts. To hear more, you can find both Season 1 and 2 of the COA podcast available on YouTube. For more information on the Chicago Area Archivists, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or our website, chicagoarchivists.org.